Hello, I'm Matt Frawley. This is Mathey Talks, and for our last Mathey Talks of the year, we have Edgar Preciado, who is class of 18 at Butler College, who's written an essay that a lot of students have already started talking about. You've already met with some groups, and I just thought it'd be great to have you here to talk about the essay and just talk about your experience, where you came from, and what even inspired you to write, a 15-page paper, this essay, when you have so much other work to do as in addition to this. So tell me, you came up with the name of the essay. What is it called?
The Orange Cage.
The Orange Cage. And why that title?
It's a play on the orange bubble. Bubble seems to be more symbolic of, I guess, innocence, in the sense like children and bubbles, playing bubbles. It seems to have a more positive connotation at the very least. And cage is, well, it's a cage, so it has more of a negative meaning to it, and but it's a bit more accurate depiction of what I think is reflective of the culture on campus.
Okay. So tell us about your background and how that led to you experiencing Princeton as the Orange Cage, let's say. So tell us where you're from, and just some of your experiences that really informed the essay.
So I am from the city of Compton in California. It is a city known for rap, gangsters, violence, and a number of other socioeconomic difficulties, poverty. So that's where I'm from. There's a lot of corruption that occurs in the city of Compton as well, in the council, in the school board. We have politicians who rob from the school system. Just recently, the principal was from my old high school, was arrested for embezzlement. And it's not likely that he would have been able to get away with that unless he had some support from the district level. There's a certain process that has to occur for him to get that kind of power to embezzle money. But and just to put it simply, there's just so many problems there. And it's difficult. It's a very difficult environment to thrive in. So you don't have many students from the region making many success stories.
Right. Now, just before you go any further, this is the sweatshirt you actually reference in the essay, right?
Yeah.
That it was the principal, you said, who was embezzling, and then to kind of garner support amongst the students, he was giving out these sweatshirts. Is that right? Or
it was not necessarily that. It's just I knew him in freshman year, and he was trying to get close to me.
Okay.
And so he gave me this sweater. I didn't know what it meant at the time.
So it wasn't the whole student body?
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
I mean, he just does it with some students.
Okay.
But I didn't know at the time what his intention was. And then eventually I started to look more into, because I'm on the school site council.
Right.
And that was the body of the school that looks at the school budget, and talking to administrators and other individuals, and you begin to notice some anomalies, some disparities within how finances are operating, or how school plans are implemented. And so then I realized much later throughout my freshman year that he was doing things like that, not because he wanted to be a genuinely friendly principal to the students, but because he kind of wants to gear them towards his side.
Okay. So there are obviously a lot of problems with the school district. You talked about how there's a lot of gang activity in Compton, and then you come here to Princeton. And tell me, just when you arrived, I'm sure you're full with expectations, full with fears. What was that like, the first couple of days on campus?
The first couple of days were wonderful. I mean, it's part of the stages of adjusting to a new culture. There's the honeymoon phase in the beginning, where you're just enamored with the environment. So that was what I experienced in the beginning, but soon, as you know from the essay, I kind of lost touch with that honeymoon phase and began to really see what the culture was in a more realistic manner. But I think that in terms of the struggles that got me here, what was important for me was using the resources that I already had, even though I didn't have many resources. And more importantly was the love that my parents would give for me, especially my mother, who I think that if it wasn't for her love for me, I wouldn't be here today. So even though there are some cultural problems on campus here, I can always like call my mother, and so like I still at least have some sort of support, even if it's thousands of miles away.
So, so after the honeymoon phase here at Princeton, what were some of the first indications that maybe there are some structural problems here with the culture at Princeton?
Well, in terms of structural problems, I would say that one of the
institutional,
institutional problems.
Yeah.
I think that I look more at individual problems, like how individuals interact with each other, and then I try to figure out how that connects with institutional problems. So I want to start first with the individual, and then like kind of show how this connects to institutional. So in the individual level, I think the honeymoon phase ended pretty quickly. So I think it ended like after 2 or 3 weeks. See, I was friends with a few other students who were of a similar economic background, very poor. But I didn't connect with them as much as I hoped I would connect with them. And I'm still trying to figure out exactly what the reason is. I have an idea of what might be plausible. Maybe we just had other differences. It's not just that we had one similarity, which is being poor, but there was other differences between like our personalities and what it is that we like to do for fun and etc. Which I still think, regardless of differences, people should try to make friends with people who are very different from each other. But I made the first move of trying to be, their friends and hanging out with them. And this has happened constantly for like 2 weeks, always me making the first step to invite myself to join their group. And then afterwards, I realized that it was I that was taking the first step. And they didn't seem to express any interest on the other hand. So after that, I stopped inviting myself, seeing if they would want me to join the group, join their friendship group, like on their own terms. But it didn't work out that way. So almost within the first month, I kind of figured something was off about that.
Okay. And so that's your individual experience, and then
the translation into the yeah. So the thing is, Princeton throws a lot of money at problems. Right, and it's a bit deceptive because we have these generous financial aid packages, and I recently, when I had a meeting with the financial aid office, like I can attest that yes, it's actually a really good policy in my opinion, the policies that they have. But it kind of attracts students who need that kind of support, that financial support, and then when they get here, they find that there's this culture of exclusivity. You have almost every single student organization selective through auditionings. You have a lot of eating clubs that have bicker, for example. Not to say that they don't have the right to do that, it's just, should they exercise that is really where the discussion should be. So another thing is, you also have these like minority support groups, but even those groups, it seems to be deceptive as well because, well, I gotta be honest with you for a second. I was considering during spring break to transfer to another school. I think that's where I really started to get an epiphany about what's going on campus and where I really started to form the essay. And I wanted to transfer to Stanford University because I read that they have a program called South Central Scholars. So I was born in South Central Los Angeles, and it's also a place that is essentially the same as Compton. And then I was raised in Compton, and I thought that would probably promote an environment that's more, I guess that's more along the lines of like where I'm from, or at least have a better support group. And I talked to some mentors back home, to some close friends, and I talked to a lot of people, and it seemed that one of my mentors, he went to USC. And that's a private school, which is essentially surrounded by a hood as well. It's
a Watts district right there.
And so even there, he still felt the same thing that I'm feeling here. So we have these programs that seem to be supporting minority or individuals, but they're not actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. So that's more of an institutional kind of problem, a bit deceptive.
So before we talk about some of the reaction you've gotten already from students and the tough questions I'm sure they've posed to you. Tell me more about what you see as the institutional competitiveness of the campus. You talk about eating clubs, and you talk briefly about even student groups. I found that quite interesting. Even groups that don't have auditions, there's still a competitive nature to them, or just getting in. Sorry, let me rephrase that. So you talked about like some of the, let's say, performing groups. You have to audition to get in them, and then they have their own parties and social groups, and so there's exclusions on. It's not just exclusion from that dance troupe. It's the whole social network that goes in there. Can you expand more about that, and also just you mentioned the how students who come in that might have more of a privileged background have an advantage in that competition. I thought that was quite interesting. So I'll throw a lot at you. Just
okay. I'll just try to answer like what I can remember. From, if I'm forgetting something, you can always. But like let's say that and this happened. Like I found out really more about this yesterday. There was an elections for the Princeton debate panel, for example, and we got to talk a bit more about the issues that we wanted to resolve on the debate panel, and like what the candidates wanted to do to resolve them. And it turns out that one of the issues was that even though we're already selected because we have auditions in the debate panel, once you get in, it seems like there would be a close community because everyone kind of has like the same interest in debate, the same interest in politics. It actually turned out not to be the case. There's a lot of, we have a couple social events, and there are people who are not, let's say, not as party going, just to avoid, saying,
right.
So they're not as party going, and they feel a bit left out at some of those social events. So there's not enough to support individuals in that aspect. And there's also the discussion about how minority students and both in race and gender, etc., economic distinction as well, how they are feeling in the debate panel. There's a lot of students in the debate panel who feel a bit excluded, that we're not really represented well. And this is not just the debate panel. This is a lot of different organizations, and I've spoken with a lot of different students about that issue as well. So even when you get into a group, the social events are also symbolic of this exclusion.
Right, okay. So tell me what reaction you've gotten so far from, you said you've already talked to a couple groups, some people about your essay and your views. Has it been mixed, or has it been positive, negative?
I find that one of the strategies to getting people to change their mind is by speaking with them in a clear, level-headed manner and trying to avoid anger, even though sometimes it might seem like it's justified. It's a challenge to do that, but I've done that, and I've actually been able to convince a lot of students who were opposed to my essay to change their views on the subject. So one of the things is usually students who are opposed to the essay are students who are from a more privileged background, and they talk with other students about exclusion culture, but the problem is them in and of themselves being from a privileged background, they get a different response from someone like myself, who would get a much different vibe from an individual who is who I'm communicating with about the subject. So let's say you have two privileged individuals who are talking to each other about exclusion, chances are they'll connect a little bit more. There's psychological studies in my Psych 101 class that talk about explicit biases versus implicit biases. After a while, adults start to lose their explicit biases. It's funny that children are actually more racist, 6-year-olds are more racist, not just racist, but other different forms of discrimination as well. But there still exists this implicit bias. So when you talk with other individuals who may be of a different background, who may be of a different group, there is some sort of implicit bias going on there. And I feel like a lot of students who are biased against in that way can actually feel that. And I've certainly felt that. So when two people from the same group are talking to each other about exclusion, they don't feel that exclusion because they're welcoming of each other. And so I express that. And I think that's what changed a couple people's mind, not everyone's mind, but it did change some perspectives about my essay.
So when you let's say people react against your essay, is it more about just your views on Princeton in general, or is it more about Bicker? Is it all over the map?
I think it's about Princeton in general.
Right.
I mean, you can also extend that to say that there's a lot of private universities also in general. I think that some universities have varying degrees of exclusion. I would argue that Princeton has a higher degree than a normal institution, given the idea of excluding ourselves from the world under this concept of the orange bubble, which in turn translates into excluding other people who are not part of the same eating club, part of the same organization, even group of friends. So I think that in that sense, it can be general to almost every private university, at least in the United States, but it's exacerbated in an institution like Princeton.
Okay. So what, there's a certain, let's say, acknowledgement amongst hopefully a growing number of students and people in the community here that, yeah, that you're right, that it's competitive, there can be these, the exclusivity is there, and we're not aware of it, but hopefully we're becoming increasingly aware of our implicit biases. So where do we go? Like, what are the solutions?
This is where it's really debatable. I think that some people might say that it's not practical. I think from personal experience, I would argue it is practical. But I would say open discussions, open dialogues with people, even people who may be on the extreme end of the other side. And again, the way you make it productive is by remaining level-headed, by avoiding anger, right, and trying not to seem overly passionate about it, and trying to be a bit more calm and collected about it.
Well, I could say it's not practical. I could see that argument in the sense that, boy, students are so busy, you can't mandate these types of discussions. Yeah. How do you make them happen?
Well, obviously you can't mandate it, but I would say that it starts with a group of students who are passionate about the issue, that they would take it on themselves to create dialogue, to create these discussions, maybe form a student organization that would have conferences on these issues where they would invite speakers to talk about exclusion, or perhaps even orchestrate discussions between leaders of minority organizations and leaders of organizations who are typically exclusive, traditionally exclusive, for example. Those are just different ideas.
Well, how about the students who are least likely to get involved in that? Is that, I could see that kind of effort being successful to a certain degree, but I'm always thinking about, boy, what about those people who, really could use it but aren't inclined to go? That's where, when I think about my work with diversity, I'm always trying to, how do I get those students involved?
Like the students who are a bit more apathetic?
Apathetic, just really, really, really busy, who just aren't, not even apathetic, they're just not sensitized to the issues yet. They're like, okay, yeah, I got it, I don't really need that. Which, is not necessarily the right response, but it's there, and so you have to grapple with that. How would you suggest to someone like me, like Director of Student Life at Mathey, help me out?
Well, it's difficult though, because you can't really force anyone to go. So I don't think that you'll ever have a solution that's completely perfect and it's going to get everyone involved. But I will say that people who, at least the way that you're describing it, seem like they don't socialize that often, so they're probably not really experiencing it or seeing other people experience it. So there seems to be another problem going on in that group as well.
I think I would see this. So here's how I put it in the best possible light. I think students come here, they're all fairly nervous, and they're wondering if they can hack it, or was their acceptance a mistake? The imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And so that would lead them to, I would be inclined, if I were that way, to try to find people who I could immediately relate to and kind of form some social circle, a clique in a way, to just help me feel comfortable. And then, so that's what I'm dealing with. And then there's these groups that say, hey, I want you to really participate in these dialogues. Part of me is like, I don't really need that, and I'm kind of just focused on my work and trying to make sure I keep my head above water here.
That reminds me, it was a week ago, I talked to a student who is about the same. He has his own group of friends. He has his own routine, and he doesn't really want to, detract from that routine. And I argued that I could probably do the same thing. I might be able to join a lot more minority organizations, maybe find more people who are more similar to me in that, and then create, I guess, happiness for myself without worrying about everyone else. But to me, that's not really fulfilling. To me, it's more fulfilling to reach out to people
All right, so we had a little technical difficulty there, but we're back. We were talking about the RCAs and the important role they were having. And you were going to talk about your
RCA. I don't know if I should say his name. He probably would like me to say his name.
Wouldn't like you?
I think he might, but I'm not sure. But the RCA in Bloomberg, second floor Butler, is an amazing RCA, which kills me because I forgot to fill out the RCA survey, which is, I'm sorry for that. But anyways, in the beginning of the school year, I was talking to him. I think that we have one-on-one RCA sessions, and so I talked to him about how I was auditioning for the Princeton debate panel, and how it was just so unusual for me because a lot of clubs back where I'm from are not so exclusive. Like, they're very open. I don't think we have any clubs that you had to audition for except for, I guess, sports teams that are like really competitive. But even the debate team back in Compton High School was very open. Anyone can join the club. And so I felt that if anyone is just interested in debating and to learn the art of debating, why wouldn't we allow them to join the club, right? And so that just didn't click to me. And I talked to my RCA about that, and he said, and I even told him that I was considering maybe like forming my own student organization, my own debate club, which was going to be very taxing and time-consuming. So I ended up not doing that. But he was very supportive during the entire conversation, and he agreed with me in a lot of the aspects that I talked about. And so I think at that moment I really connected with my RCA, and that was the moment that I kind of knew that there is some support. There is some support. I mean, eventually I kind of lost that along the path of seeing so much, I guess, not support, whether opposition maybe, implicit opposition, whatever you want to call it. So like I kind of forgot about that, but lately when I've been talking to people, then I remembered how supportive my RCA was. And so I think the RCAs do have a vital impact that they could have on the students.
So as we kind of wrap up, what more needs to be said? What in this time together? What question can I ask, or what? I just want to make sure we get as much of what you have to say said.
Yeah, I just really want to re-emphasize the absence of force and the use of level-headedness and more of an encouraging open discussion as a means to change things. I know there's a lot of individuals on campus who are very angry and upset, discontented, and I don't blame them. But if we want to get more and more people to support our cause, we have to speak to people in a bit more of a welcoming way. Otherwise, we would kind of take on the exclusion culture ourselves by excluding people from the conversation, or excluding ourselves from conversations when we get a bit too passionate and a bit too angry. So I just really want to encourage that for everyone.
That's great. Well, Edgar, I really appreciate you taking the time to come speak with us today. I appreciate the initiative you took here in writing the essay. I know we're going to get it out to students soon. And yeah, so thanks. Thanks for, I'm just so happy to get to meet you. We didn't know each other before today, and I look forward to getting to know you better in the years to come.
Thank you, Dr. Frawley.